Now it's time for America to bind the wounds of division. Have to get together. To all Republicans and Democrats and independents across this nation, I say it is time for us to come together as one united people.
Tonight, there are more signs that Donald Trump is losing that kumbaya spirit from election night or election day after morning. 3 weeks ago, he's pledging not to forget the forgotten men and women of our country. Last night, he was caught editing the tweet of a 16-year-old supporter to take a shot at a CNN reporter. Trump retweeted @filibuster, a self-described 16-year-old Oakland Raiders fan. Quote, pathetic. You have no sufficient evidence that Donald Trump did not suffer from voter fraud. Shame, exclamation point, bad reporter. But his @filibuster himself hastened to point out his original tweet did not include the ad hominem bad reporter. Quote, dishonest CNN is blaming me for calling Jeff Zeleny a bad reporter. Donald Trump added that to the end of the tweet, not me, thank you. And this morning, Trump caused a bit of a stir by suggesting there be consequences for flag burners, perhaps loss of citizenship or a year in jail. Just a small point. Those are wildly divergent penalties, just to be clear. There was immediate speculation that Trump's tweet about flag burning was part of an ongoing grand design to distract the public from more unflattering stories, such as the growing concerns about Trump's unprecedented conflicts of interest or his pick for HHA secretary may take away health insurance from millions of poor people. The real reason appears to be far more mundane. It's that Trump simply saw a story on Fox News about students at a college in Massachusetts who allegedly burned a flag. As ABC reporter Catherine Falders pointed out, timing of Trump's tweet lines up with Fox segment at 6:25 a.m. on students burning the flag. Meanwhile, Trump is about to embark on a so-called thank you tour beginning Thursday in Cincinnati of the states that he won, a trip that was originally dubbed a, quote, victory tour. Joining me now, Sam Seder, host of The Majority Report and MSNBC contributor. And here's what I find fascinating. When Democrats win, there's immediately this sort of call that they have to reach across and hail the division. There was a little bit of that in 2012, right? Like after the whole Republican autopsy, you can't lose these groups anymore, Latinos by the margins and still win election. This time you've got a guy who's got the biggest loss in the popular vote since Rutherford B. Hayes in 1876. And is just doubling down hard on that base. There is no sense that he's reaching out and no pressure to do so.
No, none. I mean, look, the whole idea of mandates I've always found to be really worthless.
Yeah, right. You win or you don't win. You have power or you don't have power.
We hear a lot about mandates.
Right.
There's no such thing.
Right.
There never was. No one has ever been constrained that way, and no one has operated under that. It is really baked into the cake as to who
That's right.
The politicians are. I mean, I think the fact that he just fired off this tweet after watching a Fox News segment is really the most telling thing about this. I don't think there's any strategy.
No.
I don't think there's any sense of I'm not healing the country. I am healing the country. I just get the sense that honestly, the transition is moving forward. There's a whole sort of not a shadow government. There's a whole government in waiting that is operating.
That's right.
And he's just sitting in the corner watching TV, and his job is to sit there and occasionally not tweet, and then he gets allowed to tweet, and God knows what's happening there. But I mean, if this is what the guy is doing, I don't think there's any grand plan. I think there's just other people doing stuff, and him sort of, they're like, well, as long as, he stays out on the porch.
And here's what's amazing about it to me is that, there's the famous wedge issue memo Patrick Buchanan wrote Nixon back in the 60s, basically saying it would cleave the country in half, but we get the bigger half, right? Well, now you've got the situation where it's the same wedge. In numerical sense, it's not the bigger half, it's the smaller half. But if there's one thing Donald Trump knows, he has a sort of real intense emotional, intuitive appeal to his hardcore supporters. And those are going to be the people this entire presidency will revolve around. Rhetorically, in terms of what issues he pushes, that's 100% clear to me.
Yeah, and I think, look, he is caught in this media bubble that we're all part of to a certain extent, and that's the feedback, and that's where he's going from, and I think that's what's driving it. I mean, I'm not even sure it's as strategic as that, as much as he's just I'm going to trust me, and he is a product of that, and there's a lot of people out there who want to consume that.
Speaking of mandates, there's a mandate happening right now at the very popular Jean-Georges restaurant, 3 Michelin stars here in New York. That's Donald Donald Trump and Mitt Romney, with Reince Priebus there playing sort of a third wheel. This was the one sort of, I don't know, I guess we have tape of this, which is totally bizarre. These are rich people eating at a very nice restaurant. The Romney subplot here, right, which is sort of a part of that, right? It's a part about the question of, like, do you move beyond your base? Because this was the guy who became the kind of the standard bearer for never Trump republicanism. What is your interpretation of what we're watching play out with respect to that?
I mean, my sense is, and this really has nothing to do with politics as much as it has to do with organization.
Personality.
There is an entire apparatus around Donald Trump that has absolutely no experience in government.
Yep.
That has, you've got stories of people walking into the White House like, who stays, who goes?
Right.
Oh, I mean, they all go? I mean,
Right,
just zero experience. It seems to me, if I was any number of those people, the last thing I would want would be someone to show up who has some semblance of understanding of the way government works.
Or would you want that more than anything?
I think,
it depends on who you are.
Like you and I would want that.
Right.
And there are people who understand you want to surround yourself with more experienced and more intelligent people. But if you are not one of those people, you're completely unexperienced, you want to wreak havoc, which I'm not convinced that from reading stuff that Bannon has said that he doesn't want a lot of that, then I think what you don't want is someone in there who is sort of a grown-up-ish. I mean, Mitt Romney's not my choice for a grown-up, but I think they perceive him that way. And I think that would be a threat to them.
Sam Cedar, always a pleasure.
Thank you, Greg.
All right, still ahead, meet Sheriff David Clarke, Donald Trump's potential pick for possibly Department of Homeland Security, who's facing renewed questions about 4 recent deaths at a jail that he is in charge of. More on that ahead. A newborn baby died at the Milwaukee County Jail in July, and the baby's mother, a former inmate, is suing, saying the jail staff ignored her request for help. The 30-year-old woman, who was almost 9 months pregnant, is seeking $8.5 million in damages. According to the Journal-Sentinel, her lawyer wrote in the notice of claims that she told a corrections officer her water broke and she was going into labor. The officer laughed and ignored her. The inmate said she told the officer she was going to labor around midnight, gave birth around 4 a.m., and finally received attention from officers at 6 a.m. Her child was pronounced dead later that day. That former inmate's claim is against the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office, which has since issued a statement saying she did not inform jail staff she was going into labor and the baby was stillborn. The inmate disputes both points. Now that Sheriff's Office is run by Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clarke. He may be familiar to you from frequent Fox News appearances, his turn as a speaker at the Republican National Convention, and even as a speaker at Trump rallies. Sheriff Clarke also made an appearance at Trump Tower yesterday, where he met with the president-elect and is reportedly under consideration for a cabinet position, possibly as head of the Department of Homeland Security. A spokeswoman for Sheriff Clarke said their office would have no further comment on the newborn's death, but that is not the only death that has occurred in the jail system that Mr. Clarke runs. Another inmate's death, Terrell Thomas, on April 24th, has been ruled a homicide caused by profound dehydration, according to the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner. According to the Journal-Sentinel, other inmates heard Thomas beg for water in the days before he died. Clarke's office said it would not be commenting on the case until all investigations and possible lawsuits have ended. Journal-Sentinel reports 2 other inmates have died at Milwaukee County Jail since April. A 38-year-old female inmate died in August, and a 29-year-old male inmate died in late October. No information has been released about the causes of death or circumstances surrounding those 2 cases. Since Clarke is under consideration to run part of the federal government, we thought we'd talk to someone who knows his record well. And joining me now, Wisconsin State Representative Mandela Barnes, representing Milwaukee. And Representative Barnes, what is your assessment of Mr. Clarke's performance in his role as the sheriff from Milwaukee County, as opposed to his role as sort of provocateur and talking head?
Well, that's about all he is a provocateur and talking head. He showed nothing but a culture of mismanagement as his time as Milwaukee County Sheriff, conveniently putting his political ambitions above the needs of the people of Milwaukee County. He had so much audacity even to neglect to protect President Barack Obama when he was in Milwaukee a few years back. Yet he's parading around with Donald Trump, made sure he made it to the Republican National Convention, and he does more political speeches and political travel than he does actually work as sheriff of Milwaukee County. There's been 4 deaths in 4 months. He's already been on the hook for over $400,000 in lawsuits, and we're looking at potentially millions more after these 4 deaths, after this is settled.
I'm curious how, obviously we're quoting Journal Sentinel reporting, and I have sources and friends in Milwaukee who I've talked to a bit about his reputation there. How much this is an issue, is a scandal there? I mean, obviously they deny that the charges of the woman who's suing, but a newborn dead in a jail is no small thing.
Right, and so this is Sheriff Clark not performing his duties. This is his staff under his supervision. Imagine if he's the head of Homeland Security, what kind of trouble that spells for people across the entire United States. It should be very frightening for a lot of people who only hear Sheriff David Clark, but don't actually know Sheriff David Clark's actions.
You know, we should make the point the Department of Homeland Security, of course, is the entity that runs huge facilities that detain and incarcerate thousands, hundreds of thousands at times, immigrants, sometimes families. There's been huge abuses. A lot of that's privatized, even under the Obama administration. Human rights groups have raised concerns. That would be one of the main duties of Sheriff Clark were he to take that position.
Yeah, and one thing that a lot of people can identify with is travel, and you got to think about the TSA, how frustrating travel already is. Imagine if a Sheriff David Clark gets into that post, you know, what we'll be facing is average Americans.
Does he have a future in Milwaukee County politics or in Wisconsin politics, or has he become a kind of national figure? He really, I mean, for someone who has a job, it is rare to see a public official spend as much time on cable news as he does.
Well, he's made his career deceiving the voting public in Milwaukee County. He runs as a Democrat. We know he's not a Democrat. And it's very unfortunate for the person who goes to the ballot and just sees Democrat and checks Democrat, or even people who see a black figure and assume that he has black interests at heart and support him, because that's what's been happening over the past, or over the several years, over the past few elections. I don't believe that he has a future in Milwaukee County at this point, simply because his head is swollen so big. His platform has become that much greater with the conservative right. He's their darling now. He's their guy. He hasn't been Milwaukee County's guy for a long time, and I'm glad someone else can take ownership of him. He
has said a lot of very controversial things. He's talked about our institutions of government and big media are corrupt. All we do is bitch, pitchforks, and torches time. He also said before long...
he incited a riot.
Yeah, he said Black Lives Matter will join forces with ISIS to bring down our legally constituted republic. You heard it here first. This is someone who, you know, oversees a law enforcement agency, presumably, that has to provide security at protests and so forth.
Yeah, so someone should have to assume what his role as a Homeland Security director would be.
That's right.
With peaceful protesters who could potentially be detained, who could be potentially stripped of all of their rights. He's not a person who even abides by the Constitution. He's not a person who I consider to be a serious law enforcement professional. Again, he is a provocateur. He is a right-wing talking head, and it stops there.
All right, Mandela Barnes, State Representative, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Coming up, is Jason Chaffetz as committed to investigating Donald Trump's potential conflicts of interest as he was for the possible Clinton presidency? Well, we thought we'd ask him about that. His response ahead. Plus, tonight's Thing 1, Thing 2 starts after this break.